This has got to be the worst title for a film I've seen since Mandela: Long Walk to Freedom. You can have Mandela. You can go more metaphorical with Long Walk to Freedom. You can't and shouldn't have both. Michael Carney, Same Kind of Different as Me, boasts a trite and maudlin title that emphasizes a distinctive thing while framing it awkwardly by juxtaposing two antonyms, same and different. It's very contrived. It's very odd sounding too. And it's another one of those sayings that sounds like something that your grandfather would tell you when you came home judging somebody on a baseless thought. This is an odd little film, not as bad as some of the other Pure Flix efforts. Pure Flix is, of course, the studio that puts a lot of moral and faith-based dramas out every year. The film stars Greg Kinnear, Renée Zellweger, and a couple other actors, one of whom I liked is Djimon Hounsou, who is very good in this film. I got to talk about him a little bit as well. The film is kind of a Blind Side-esque redemption tale revolving around an art dealer named Ron and his wife Debbie, played by Greg Kinnear and Renée Zellweger respectively, whose marriage is struggling as Ron's job starts to overtake their marriage. One day, Debbie motivates Ron by really forcing him to help work with her at a food bank inside of a local homeless shelter. It's there they meet a man who calls himself Suicide, played by Hounsou. He is evidently mentally unstable. He's got some seriously violent tendencies as he takes a bat to a window in his first introduction on screen. But he comes to introduce himself as Denver Moore, who has had a troubled life. He's been homeless ever since racists burned down his home when he lived on a plantation. And the film is based on a book by the real life Ron Hall, and actually referred to the Denver Moore as somebody who was a modern day slave. He was a slave to the institution, a prison institution, in addition to just life in general. That's kind of how his character is painted in this film. But the more they get to know Denver, the more they get to talk to him, they realize that he is honestly a very earnest soul, but he views relationships with people of a higher social class than him as a catch and release, take and give sort of thing, where there's a great monologue by Denver where he's talking to Ron and says that a lot of people have catch and release relationships. He says, just like a catch and release pond of fishing, he said, you catch something, you show it off, and then you discard it. Well, that, unfortunately, as much as the film tries to work against that narrative, it honestly winds up being it. And it really, there's a respectable level of human interest in this movie when it focuses on Denver's side of the story. The account he gives detailing his youth and experiences with racism are very vivid, realized, and timely as well. There's a scene where Denver encounters some shock art at one of Ron's gallery sales that triggers a particularly brutal memory that we see. There's some very good humanization in this film of the Denver character, and Hounsou is excellent in the role. But the problem with the film, in my opinion, is that any time that the film shifts focus and either doesn't focus on the Denver character or doesn't focus on Ron's father, played by Jon Voight, anytime that the film doesn't focus on one of those two characters, it's a flat and nimble movie. It doesn't have a lot of things going for it. Renée Zellweger, who's damn near unrecognizable in this movie, she doesn't add a lot to it. Greg Kinnear is about as plain as he always is. Their performances don't really transcend anything outside the basic constraints of just hospitable, good old Texas folk as well. The Christian subtext is interwoven fine. It really doesn't seem to be too heavy-handed, but it does seem to be a little bit too self-congratulatory. You can tell this is the kind of movie where there's a lot of general, again, self-congratulatory vibes when it comes to Kinnear and Zellweger's actions of befriending Denver and a lot of other men and women at this homeless shelter. It might not come off like that. This is indeed based off a true story. It might not come off like that in real life, but it sure comes off in this movie. I give the poorly titled but somewhat serviceable Same Kind of Different as Me 2 out of 4 stars. It's not bad. It's the kind of film, I'm just going to say this, it's the kind of film that has dialogue like this, okay? Ron is looking around a kitchen in a homeless shelter initially, and he says, any infectious diseases floating around this place that I should know about? And one of the cooks, and the cook, who's reference to the homeless people, he says, we try to infect them with love. That's the kind of movie you're dealing with right now, with Same Kind of Different as Me. 2 out of 4 stars for the Pure Flix drama. Not as bad as some of the other Christian dramas I've sat through this year, but when your competition comes in the form of The Resurrection of Gavin Stone, All Saints, A Question of Faith, and the dreadful Slamma Jamma, you really don't have much conversation and you don't really have much praise in that regard. Not a terrible movie. Let it pass.